welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes when we crack open the archives, we're bracing for, dense philosophical walls of text about universal structure.
Right, the really heavy stuff.
Exactly. And then sometimes you stumble into a session that feels more like, I don't know, a wonderfully specific, highly detailed, and actually pretty funny cosmic drama.
Oh, absolutely. Complete with lecherous landowners, overwrought sailors, and some seriously complex family trauma playing out.
This is definitely one of those times. It's got this unique blend.
It truly does. What we're digging into today is just wonderfully granular, really personal, and honestly, highly entertaining. It's a look at karmic entanglement, creative discipline, and sometimes just the sheer absurdity of past life debt.
Yeah, absurdity is a good word for parts of it.
But it's also packed with practical psychological advice, all wrapped up in these unforgettable stories.
So we're settling in for what feels like a relaxed, maybe a bit chilling in that cosmic sense, but definitely a very detailed analysis of one specific historical account.
That's the plan.
For this deep dive, we are zeroing in on session 46 of the early sessions, book 2 of Seth material. And just for the record, this session was recorded on Wednesday, April 22, 1964.
And our mission today really is to take you beyond just a summary. We want to properly unpack the personal revelations, the deep psychological advice that Seth gave directly to the people actually there.
Right, to Mark Joseph Ruburt.
Exactly. And maybe most memorably, those astonishingly funny past life stories that Seth uses like surgical teaching tools. It's brilliant.
We want you to walk away not just knowing the facts, but really getting the implications, feeling the connections.
Yeah, understanding the why behind it all.
And before we jump right in, we absolutely want to credit our source material, the Seth material, and the publisher, New Awareness Network.
Crucial.
And look, if you find this exploration of multi-life identity and psychological discipline as fascinating as we do, and honestly, I think we really encourage you to study further.
Definitely. Check out the Seth material books themselves.
And visit the New Awareness Network website and bookstore. That's at sethcenter.com/the early sessions. Loads of resources there.
And just so everyone knows, we are committed to sharing this knowledge freely and widely. As we always do with these deep dives, this session analysis will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
Okay, so let's dive into the atmosphere of session 46 itself. It feels distinct right from the start, doesn't it? Because it introduces a new witness, a surprise witness, really.
Yeah, Bill Macdonnel, who Seth immediately starts calling Mark.
And Mark's arrival seems to completely shift the focus.
It really dictates the whole direction of the material, yeah. This entire session pivots to focus intensely on his current personality traits, his inner senses, and how those are just completely tied into this deep, traceable karmic history.
It's like Seth was waiting for him.
Well, Seth makes it clear he anticipated it. He says right at the start, "I am pleased to see that our old friend Mark has seen fit to avail himself at last of my company."
At last. Like, about time you showed up.
Exactly. It's this immediate, warm acknowledgement, but also maybe a little bit pointed. It sets the tone for a very personal, very direct discussion.
Okay, let's start with those little procedural details first. They always add this charming human layer to the sessions, don't they?
They really do. Grounding, in a way.
So before Seth actually comes through, Jane, that's Ruburt and Joseph, were trying this exercise in what Seth calls psychological time. What exactly is that again? Can you refresh us?
Sure. Psychological time, or psych time as they sometimes call it, is essentially this mental discipline exercise. It's about trying to shift your focus away from physical linear time, clock time, and away from just physical sensory data.
So turning inward.
Right, turning attention inward to perceive time as more elastic, maybe nonlinear, and reality as multi-layered. It takes a specific kind of intense meditative focus, trying to feel existence outside the tick-tock of the clock.
And how did it go for them this time?
Well, Joseph apparently couldn't recall anything specific from his attempt, which Seth says is pretty common, actually. It's hard work.
But Jane got something.
Jane had a curious little breakthrough, yeah. She received, and this is the quote, snatches of tinny music as though it was being played on an old rickety piano.
Tinny music on a rickety piano. That's such a specific image.
Isn't it? It's a fantastic metaphor for that initial inner perception. It's not some grand orchestra, right? It's these faint, distant signals trying to get through the static of the physical world.
Like tuning an old radio.
Exactly. It shows the inner self is starting to tune this very sensitive instrument, even if the sound is just like a ghost of a tune initially. Progress, though.
And then the guest arrives, 8:55 p.m. Bill Macdonnell, Mark just walks in unexpectedly.
Yeah, surprise arrival. And he quickly sits down, starts taking his own notes. He's ready to participate.
And Jane, the medium, she notes her initial nerves, feeling a bit nervous because of the witness, which understandably could affect things.
Totally. It led to her initial pacing being rather fast, and her eyes darkened, which was usual, but the speed was noticeable. That heightened state, the nervousness, often meant the first part of the delivery came out somewhat more rapid.
But the really memorable detail, the one that speaks volumes about the energy shift, involves the cat.
Ah, Willie, yes.
Willie the cat jumps onto Jane's lap just a minute or two before the session officially began. Why is this such a big deal?
Because the source notes explicitly this was unprecedented. It was the first time he had ever done that in all the sessions recorded up to that point.
Wow. So the cat knew something was different.
It gives you this wonderful kind of anecdotal proof of a non-physical presence building, doesn't it? The implication is Willie sensed Seth's presence right there, building up, but, and this is key, he was not perturbed.
Not scared, just drawn to it.
Exactly. The cat, whose senses maybe aren't filtered by our kind of human intellect and skepticism, detected this powerful energy shift and was drawn to Jane, the center of it, yet felt completely safe. It's a perfect, sort of chilling little environmental proof point. Very cool.
Okay, so moving on to the first actual order of business in the session content, Seth provides an update on Ms. Callahan.
Yes, the ongoing process of her dying. Seth confirmed that a specific crisis point they were watching around April 15th had passed.
And psychologically, what was happening?
The really interesting bit here is about her ego. Seth says her ego had finally given up the struggle. Why? Because it realized it will not be liquidated. That fear of oblivion, of annihilation, had started to subside.
So the realization that death isn't the end, but a transformation, a new beginning, that brought her some fundamental comfort.
Exactly. That realization seems to be coming directly from her own experience as she transitions. It's bringing her basic satisfaction.
And then comes the part that always makes you chuckle.
Well, yeah, because Joseph is just so consistent. The mention of Frank Watts.
Joseph always manages to bring Frank Watts into the discussion, doesn't he?
He really does. And Seth playfully calls him out on it, saying, I certainly, most certainly admire your interest and concern with Frank Watts. You always manage to bring him into a discussion. You can almost hear the smile in the words.
But Seth does confirm Frank Watts' involvement.
He does. He confirms Frank Watts is aware of Miss Callahan's condition.
And that he will be there to greet her, to her surprise, since our Frank always considered himself a friend of hers, although she was scarcely aware of his existence.
And that's the crucial philosophical takeaway right there. It confirms that these bonds, these connections, the genuine emotional and, entity-level connections we have for others, they transcend conscious physical awareness.
So even if she barely knew him in life.
Exactly. Frank Watts, barely known by her consciously, was still intrinsically linked to her transition. It proves the support system isn't just physical or consciously chosen. The relationship exists on this deeper, non-conscious level. That one detail reinforces so much of the Seth paradigm about interconnectedness.
Okay, so now the spotlight swings entirely onto Mark, the surprise guest, and his own inherent abilities. Specifically, this tendency he has to experience what he calls fragmentary apparitions.
Yeah, Seth dives right into Mark's stuff. He describes Mark as having natively strong inner senses, naturally quite psychic, and having seen many apparitions over time.
But Mark perceives them as fragmentary. Why? Is the information incomplete?
Not necessarily. Seth explains that the reason Mark perceives them as fragments is often due to his own inability to organize the material from the inner senses. It's not that the apparition itself wasn't whole.
Ah, okay. So the issue isn't the signal strength. It's more like the receiver's filter or how he's processing it. That kind of chops the experience into pieces.
Exactly. It happens because the receiver, the current physical personality, the ego, lacks a certain confidence and, crucially, the right kind of discipline in handling non-physical data.
What happens then?
When a strong intuitive signal comes through, the, let's say, aggressive intellect, the ego, tends to rush in. It tries to categorize it immediately, label it, rationalize it, make sense of it in familiar terms.
And that messes it up.
It literally destroys the integrity of the data. It breaks the connection.
Which brings us to a really key teaching in this whole session, something vital for anyone trying to develop intuition. This idea of passive discipline. That sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? Discipline usually feels active.
It does, but it's a profound and really necessary distinction Seth makes. He explains the discipline required here is passive, not aggressive. If the ego is too aggressive, it snaps back too quickly.
Like slamming a door on the inside.
Kind of. Think of passive discipline more like sustained, focused listening, or like holding a very delicate, intricate object like a piece of silk without crushing it. You have to be present, focused, but gentle.
So if the ego rushes in, that's what the source calls the smothering effect.
Precisely. Mark often accepts the initial flash of an experience, but then, in this intellectual attempt to grab it, to capture it, he effectively smothers them to death. He doesn't allow the data, the space, or time to unfold on its own terms.
What's the advice then?
The advice is direct. Wait and listen longer. This isn't about being lazy or zoned out. It's about active restraint. Sustained, open focus without jumping to conclusions.
The practical application of that feels huge. For any learner, it means resisting that immediate urge to interpret or judge that first flash of insight or intuition.
You have to allow the subtle energy, the inner data, enough durability to be realized. Give it time to stabilize in your awareness.
How long is longer, though? Practically speaking, is it seconds?
Minutes. It's probably not about clock time. It's the length of time required for the inner data to move from just a feeling or a fragment into something more organized, a meaningful communication, perhaps. It takes courage, really, to sit in that space of ambiguity, resisting the ego's demand for immediate definition and certainty.
And for Mark, his natural impatience and impulsive nature, which, as we'll see, is linked to a past life that makes this even harder for him.
Absolutely. His psychological history directly feeds into his ability, or inability, to perceive clearly from the inner senses. Seth actually notes that Mark's impulsive nature is more restrained in this life than it was in his previously violent existence.
I'll get to that.
We will.
Wow.
But he still needs that more disciplined ego to properly harness his strong innate abilities. So Mark is advised to actively exercise himself in psychological time with the assurance that, given his inherent strength, he should progress pretty quickly once he masters this passive discipline.
So it's about learning to relax into the unknown, not charge at it.
Beautifully put. That's exactly it.
Okay, this is where we shift gears into the, well, frankly, hilarious and incredibly illuminating history of Mark's deeper self, his entity. We get this three-life arc that demonstrates that principle of psychological compensation just perfectly.
It really is the ultimate example of the soul using these massive personality shifts, even changing genders, to try and address karmic imbalance. It's fascinating stuff.
Let's start with life one 3 lifetimes ago. Seth says Mark possessed a remarkably cruel and violent nature. Very direct.
No pulling punches there. And Seth is explicit that Mark's current extreme kindness, his impulsive generosity, it's a direct overcompensation for the cruelty of that specific past existence.
He's running hard in the opposite direction, essentially.
Pretty much. That's the engine driving a lot of his current personality. This deep-seated fear of reverting to that former state. It makes him overly cautious about any action that feels aggressive or even just strongly self-protective.
Okay, so then in the life immediately previous to this one, the compensation swings wildly the other way. Mark was a woman.
Yep, a woman in the Midwest Iowa, specifically around the 1840s in what's now a major city there.
And Seth gives us that absolutely phenomenal line about her personality.
Oh, it's classic Seth wit. He was erratic. You might say that Mark was too erratic to be erotic.
Chuckles. I mean, only Seth.
Right. That level of personal, witty, almost cutting assessment is just pure Seth. So this woman had 3 children in that life, and she was fairly wealthy. And crucially, this is where she started consciously or subconsciously paying her psychological debts.
Not through violence or art yet, but through money.
Exactly. Seth says she gave away much money in a subconscious attempt to make up for the aggressive and cruel male existence just previous.
So the impulsive, generous streak we see in Mark today, that really began back then in that Midwest life as this overly generous, maybe slightly scattered woman.
That's the implication, yes. The pattern started there. Seth clarifies that choosing a woman's personality in that particular era was, on one hand, a somewhat understandable weakness, a way to maybe escape the direct responsibility of aggressive masculinity that was expected then.
But also brave.
But also, Seth says, it represented bravery. It allowed him, as this female personality, to embrace kindness more easily and avoid the temptations of over-aggressiveness and cruelty that a male form might have presented to his entity at that specific time. He essentially took a conscious psychological break from aggression.
Okay, connecting that whole arc to the present day in 1964, The family meshwork is just staggeringly complex.
Isn't it? It really drives home how interconnected these things are.
So Mark's present mother, she was actually his wife back in that earlier, cruel, aggressive male life.
Correct. That's the core connection. The current lifetime is structured, in part, as a direct debt payment for how he treated her back then. Mark chose, on some level, to be born as her son, specifically to repay the debt incurred because he was unkind and unfeeling to her as a husband.
Okay, that makes a certain karmic sense, but then it gets even more complicated, right? This beautiful example of subconscious debt management kind of going sideways.
This is where the system reveals its beautiful, yet often messy reality, because the goal might be debt payment, but human psychology gets in the way.
Wait, so if the goal is for Mark to pay a debt by being kind now, why is the mother now sort of using his kindness against him?
Because she remembers. Seth says the mother subconsciously remembers his earlier unfeeling attitude as her husband, and she now hounds upon his impulsive nature and sensitivity to pay him back. She's basically manipulating his current kindness, which is itself is overcompensation, to extract payment for that past emotional harm.
Wow. Okay, that feels profoundly unfair, or at least highly inefficient from a cosmic standpoint. If karmic payment is the goal, she's basically correcting an old imbalance by creating a brand new one.
Exactly. That's the irony, and it's a critical lesson. Seth warns that this behavior is an error on her part, for which she will have to suffer the consequences in still another existence.
So you don't just get a free pass to collect on old debts however you want.
No. It means the system isn't based on some perfect, divine, automatic equilibrium. It's based on messy, conscious and subconscious human interaction, choices, and errors. You can absolutely misuse the payment structure and accrue new debt even while you think you're resolving an old one. It makes the whole cycle feel incredibly dynamic, sometimes frustrating, but also intensely real.
So this means Mark's whole immediate family, his mother, his brothers, himself, they've been tangled up in this unusual manner for at least 3 lives, running, swapping roles, working out these deep-seated issues generation after generation.
It reinforces that Seth concept that very few intimate family connections are truly accidental. There's usually a deep history. But then Seth throws a curveball into the discussion. He asks Joseph who the 2 exceptions are in the room.
Right, the 2 people who were not part of that intense, immediate 3-life family meshwork Mark was in for the past couple of lives.
And Joseph gets it right.
He says, why Gene and me, I suppose?
Correct. The narrator, Joseph, and the medium, Jane Ruburt, they were the exceptions, kind of orbiting outside that really intense 3-life family drama.
But they weren't totally disconnected from Mark.
No, not entirely disconnected from his past lives. Seth confirms Mark was connected to them back in that Iowa life. Mark was actually one of Joseph's children during that Iowa existence.
When Mark was the erratic woman.
Yes. And adding another layer, Mark's oldest present brother was also a son of Mark back when Mark was the woman in Iowa.
Good grief, it's like a cosmic soap opera cast list.
It is. A true entity circle of interaction. And Mark gets a little compliment out of it too. Seth notes, Mark made an exceptionally good mother.
Even while being erratic.
Apparently so. So all that backstory, that complex family and past life context, it allows Seth to transition really smoothly into how these dynamics are playing out right now in Mark's current creative life, specifically his painting.
Right. We see that Mark's present over-impulsiveness, which ironically makes him vulnerable to his mother's manipulation, is that overcompensation for early aggressiveness. It's like his whole entity remembers.
Seth confirms that. He says Mark is afraid to act even in a self-protective manner because in the past your actions resulted in violence. He literally fears his own power, his own potential for aggression based on that deep memory.
And this fear, this imbalance, is actually what fuels his creative drive.
In a way, yes. Seth confirms Mark's painting is almost a direct, structured response to a desire for creativity, specifically to balance out that former destructive personality. It's like the entity is seeking equilibrium through creation.
But that impulse to create still needs discipline.
Absolutely. That same impulse behind his creativity must now be disciplined, using that passive discipline we talked about earlier, for it to really come to fruition, to reach its full potential.
And this leads to the idea of art itself being a form of psychological debt payment. It's fascinating. First, as the woman in Iowa, he gave away money. Now he gives away parts of himself. But in what form?
In the form of living psychological forms, that's Seth's term. These forms are created through what Seth calls the metaphysical law of value extension.
Value extension, what is that exactly?
Value extension is the spontaneous, inherent tendency of consciousness, of identity, to create forms beyond itself, to translate inner reality, feelings, concepts into external forms that then possess their own kind of independent vitality.
So the painting isn't just paint on canvas.
Not in this view. Because art draws upon the abilities and the reality of the entire entity, not just the conscious personality, the resulting forms, the paintings, are freer from the limitations and defects of his current personality. The art can actually transcend the artist's immediate psychological hang-ups and issues.
The painting literally has its own life, its own vitality. Seth mentions this applies to poetry too, for Rupert's benefit. They have their own vitality and exist independently of the artist. How does that function as a debt repayment, though?
Think of it as the ultimate purified gift back to the universe or to others. It's this spontaneous, free, impulsive burst of creation that inherently asks for nothing tangible in return. Unlike the aggressive actions of his past life, which took from others, or even giving away money, which was still tied to the physical world and maybe carried subconscious baggage.
Creating beauty just adds something.
Exactly. Creating beauty, creating these forms of value, adds to the fabric of reality. It contributes.
So by creating beauty in his paintings, Mark actually more than makes up for past aggressive errors. How?
Because the art itself, Seth says, instills positive creative thoughts in the mind of the beholder. He's essentially planting seeds of goodness, of creativity, of positive value in the consciousness of others, ripple effects he can't even track.
So the debt is repaid not through suffering or self-punishment, but through positive contribution, through creation.
Precisely. And that gives such profound validation to any creative pursuit, doesn't it? It positions art, writing, music, whatever it is, as a fundamental mechanism for karmic balancing and genuine soul growth. It's perhaps the highest, most constructive use of that impulsive energy he's working to tame.
Okay, let's just take a breath here and frankly enjoy the pure comic relief that Seth offers up next. This is the infamous Tree Barn story.
Oh, it's pure gold.
It's the source of some real amusement, clearly for Seth too. And it connects Mark, Joseph, and Ruburt. In this scenario, that sounds like, I don't know, some kind of body historical farce.
It absolutely does. And Seth clearly enjoys telling it, using humor as this incredible tool to illustrate their deep historical connection. He introduces it by specifically commenting on Joseph's past relationship with his son's mistresses back in Denmark. Talk about a family saga.
The setting is this town, Trief, in Denmark, where Mark and Joseph apparently knew each other twice before this particular incident.
Right, and the roles they played are just pricelessly described.
Mark was a sailor, specifically a sailor on Seth's spice ship.
Yeah, just a casual mention of Seth having a spice ship back then. A little nod to his own past lives, perhaps.
And Joseph.
Yeah.
Joseph was the, how did Seth put it, the pudgy, hairy-chested, and lecherous landowner.
Chuckles. The specificity is just incredible. It paints such a vivid and, let's be honest, pretty unflattering picture of Joseph in that life.
Definitely not his most dignified incarnation.
Seems not. And Ruburt, Jane in this life, was Joseph's son back then, an artist.
For whom Joseph, the lecherous landowner dad, had no understanding nor use for art as any man's profession. Classic generational conflict.
Totally. And Seth even throws in a little modern-day dig at Joseph, saying, Ruburt treats you much better than you treated him back then. A little reminder.
Okay, so now for the main event. The climax in the barn on an October evening. Mark, the sailor, described as tipsy,
Important detail.
come tiptoeing from the fields, apparently with a knife in his belt, fully expecting to catch his fair damsel.
Who Seth dismissively notes was just a numbskull. Hardly worth your notice, by the way.
Laughs right. Expecting to catch her in the arms of Joseph's artist son, Ruburt.
So Mark, the sailor, is primed for a confrontation with the young man, his rival for this numbskull damsel. He bursts into the barn.
And instead of the son, he finds Dad, the barrel-chested, white-haired, and lecherous, lustful old geezer, Joseph himself.
Caught red-handed in the act of, quote, deflowering the girl.
And Seth adds that hilarious footnote, who incidentally had already been deflowered many times before. The detail just kills me.
It's so unnecessary, but makes it so much funnier. So picture the scene. Joseph, totally busted, apparently drops his pretty parcel, the girl.
And then thinks the bellowing intruder, Mark the sailor, is actually his own son, Ruburt.
Yes, and in his panic and embarrassment, he makes this truly laughable attempt to elicit your son's sympathy, Seth says. He literally wept in his beard.
A grown man, A pudgy, hairy-chested, lecherous landowner weeping in his beard, caught in a barn with the girl he shouldn't be with. The visual is just pure comedy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Mark, the sailor, realizing he's found the father, not the son he was expecting, what does he do?
He damn near strangled Joseph instead.
Yeah.
Just an immediate explosion of tipsy sailor's rage directed at the old man.
Understandable, perhaps. But the postscript to the story is what really shows the early seeds of Mark's current, kinder nature starting to sprout, even back then.
Right. Because Ruburt, the son, arrives later, finds Mark and the mistress together. Things clearly got sorted out somehow because the next morning, both young men, Mark and Ruburt, show up with black eyes.
And Mark has a broken wrist, so there was definitely some kind of confrontation between the two younger men later on.
But Mark, despite the humiliation, the fight, the broken wrist, he did something kind.
Out of the goodness of his heart, Seth says, Mark never told your son who he found first in the barn. He kept Joseph's secret.
He protected the son from knowing what his father had been up to. That was a compassionate act, wasn't it? An early kind of repayment, maybe, for the karmic debt of his own aggression.
Seems like it. Joseph clearly felt the weight of it, saying back then he was in his debt for that silence. And Seth confirms that while none of them consciously remember any of this now.
Seth does.
Seth does. He says, "At least I can get a good laugh at your expense, Joseph." The humor, for Seth, feels like this powerful way to release some of that old stored tension and embarrassment.
And just to complete this incredibly tangled web, Seth connects Ed Robbins, the guy who was instrumental in introducing Joseph and Jane and really getting the sessions going in this lifetime.
Yeah, Ed.
Seth links him back to this Denmark period, too. Says Ed was Rendelin, another individual closely connected to this whole trio, Mark, Joseph, Ruburt, in past lives.
It just shows the whole system is far more integrated, the cast of characters far more interconnected across lifetimes than any of them consciously knew at the time. Mind-boggling, really. Okay, so shifting gears again from that Danish barn comedy back to some deeper metaphysics. Seth uses all this context about past lives and connections to talk about how concepts, especially through value extension, can kind of bypass the usual limits of space and time.
Right. And he applies this directly to a current problem Mark is having.
Exactly. But first, the principle. Seth notes that qualities like, say, knowledge or personality itself, they take up no space. They're invisible in our normal physical space. We only ever see the results they produce, actions, creations, effects.
Okay, that makes sense.
And art, Seth argues, is the supreme example of translating these non-spatial qualities. Art attempts to put into a physical framework like a canvas or a sculpture, or even words and poetry, something which usually has no existence in space or time.
Use the example of the crucifixion.
Yeah. The concept of the crucifixion, Seth says, has no existence basically in time. It's an archetypal event or symbol. Yet art creates a concept form where this unexpressible idea is transformed into expressible, spatial, visual terms. Art tries to bridge that gap, to make the timeless tangible. It transcends those limits.
So this provides the philosophical backdrop for Mark's very real, very frustrating physical problem.
Yeah.
He's lost one of his paintings?
Yeah. A crucifixion painting, interestingly enough, which he had shown at a local sidewalk art exhibit. He's been desperate to find it. It's just vanished.
And Seth confirms this wasn't just random theft or carelessness.
No. According to Seth, the loss was entirely psychological in origin. It ties right back into those heavy family dynamics and the debt situation we talked about earlier with his mother.
So even though he consciously intended to give the painting to his mother, subconsciously he resented it.
Precisely. The resentment was rooted deep down, probably connected to that past life where he felt he was unkind to her as a husband, and now maybe feels his current act of kindness, giving the painting, is being sort of coerced or expected as payment in a way that feels unfair.
So his subconscious arranged for the painting to get lost. How?
As a kind of subconscious punishment for himself, maybe? Or maybe just to avoid the conflicted feelings around the gift?
Oh.
Seth says Mark allowed the painting to be lost through a series of small slips, errors, and mistakes of his own and others. It wasn't one big event, but a chain reaction orchestrated subconsciously.
Like forgetting to secure it properly, someone else misplacing it. A series of minor mishaps.
Exactly. An act of subconscious self-sabotage, really, designed to resolve the internal conflict by removing the object of conflict.
The sheer complexity of the subconscious mind is just astounding sometimes. It will sacrifice a valued creation to try and resolve an internal ethical dilemma.
It really is. So the big question then, where is the painting now? And Seth gets remarkably specific here, really demonstrating his ability to tap into non-local information.
What does he say?
He's very clear. The painting has been in the same place ever since it was removed from the art show. It is, quote, in a room with 3 windows, which is connected to the larger room, and it's located in a public-type building in this town, Elmira, where men work.
Wow. 3 windows. Public building where men work. That's specific.
Extremely. And the source notes confirm that Mark immediately started thinking along those lines, maybe a school principal's office or some kind of municipal administrative office. He apparently planned to investigate based on those clues.
That level of detail, down to the number of windows, it's just an incredible potential verification of Seth's awareness, isn't it? Assuming Mark finds it there.
It really is. And it serves as this concrete proof, potentially, that the internal psychological drama, that subconscious refusal to complete the gift to the mother, actually orchestrated a chain of physical events leading to this very specific, theoretically verifiable physical location.
The subconscious isn't just abstract thoughts and feelings. It's actively shaping physical reality.
That's the powerful implication, yes.
Okay, so as session 46 started to wrap up, Seth offered some final bits of advice and insight. Mainly for Mark.
Yeah, a kind of summary for him. Seth noted that Mark's energy resources felt a bit scattered that particular evening, but he reinforced the main point. With that passive discipline we discussed, Mark could learn to focus his strong abilities along highly constructive lines, like his art.
And he also threw in a very practical warning, didn't he? About apartment hunting.
He did. Very down-to-earth advice. Mark was apparently looking for a new apartment, and Seth advised him to proceed, but warned him of potential difficulties. Not practical problems like plumbing, but difficulties of a temperamental nature with the landlord.
Like a personality clash waiting to happen.
Pretty much. Seth called it a more or less mutual antagonism that might arise. Another little hint of maybe karmic friction or just psychological incompatibility waiting for him in the physical world. Forewarned is forearmed, I guess.
And we also get a brief final mention about Miss Callahan's timeline.
Just a quick update. Seth projected her final crisis point would likely be around May 23rd, and he also gave a little nod to Joseph, commending his development throughout the sessions.
But before the session completely closed, Seth circled back to clarify another old mystery that Mark had apparently shared with Jane and Joseph before.
Yeah.
This lost town experience.
Oh, right. This is fascinating. When Mark was about 11 years old, he was walking in the fields near his home and suddenly found himself in this old-fashioned looking town.
With a blacksmith shop. People wearing odd clothing. Stuff that shouldn't have been there, and then he could never find it again.
Like Brigadoon or something. He literally stumbled into a past life memory bleed-through.
Is that what Seth confirmed?
Exactly. Seth confirmed this wasn't just imagination. It was a subconscious projection of a memory from a past life. And the town he saw, it was, in fact, Treve.
The town in Denmark. The setting of the barn incident.
The very same. Seth said Mark only projected the portion of the town that he, Mark, was intimately concerned with back then, and he even gave Mark's name from that lifetime, Grand Grayley.
Grand Grayley, the tipsy sailor. Wow, so that's an astonishing example, a literal, localized, temporary manifestation of a past life environment witnessed by the current physical personality.
It really shows the incredible power of deep memory to sometimes override our consensus physical reality, even at just for a few moments. The veil thinned for him that day.
Okay, and finally we get Joseph's own personal records. Evidence of his own accelerated development after all this.
Yes, the narrator, Joseph, details 2 really clear, distinct visions he had the very next night, April 23rd, while he was practicing that psychological time exercise again. It confirms his capacity to receive and hold inner data was definitely growing.
What was the first vision?
The first one was incredibly clear, kind of disturbing actually. A young girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a belted blue party dress with long yellow hair.
Okay.
And she was repeatedly stomping down hard on a small, bewildered-looking white and brown dog.
Oof, stomping on a dog.
Yeah. Seth noted the dog seemed unhurt and eventually just scampered away, but the image itself, the clarity and the duration was striking for Joseph. It showed he was holding that inner sighting much longer than before.
What's the symbolism there? Innocence acting cruelly?
Could be. The child represents innocence, maybe potential, but the stomping suggests an immature, perhaps unconscious use of power. Maybe the crushing of a small, defenseless spirit, or perhaps the conscious mind trying to suppress the subconscious inner self, represented by that bewildered dog.
But the dog getting away suggests resilience.
Maybe. that the inner vitality, the instinctual self, while it might be temporarily bewildered or pushed down by the immature ego, it ultimately remains unhurt and escapes complete suppression. It's a complex little image.
And the second vision, seen on a TV-like screen?
Yeah, he perceived this one within a frame, like an old TV screen with rounded corners. It was a bald male head, maybe late 40s or older, and Joseph noted an oriental feeling to the features.
What was the feeling of this figure?
This figure seems much more archetypal, maybe a guide figure. He was smiling, described as kind and compassionate, but at the same time, his eyes were sparkling bright and brimming with tears.
Smiling through tears. That's powerful. Compassion and sorrow together.
Exactly. That juxtaposition is key. But the most arresting feature, the detail that really grabbed Joseph, was the presence of tiny, light or white crosses centered upon each pupil.
Crosses on his pupils. Wow. What on earth do we make of that?
It is absolutely loaded with symbolism, isn't it? The smiling compassion suggests an advanced being, maybe a guide or a higher aspect of self. The tears suggest a deep understanding of human pain, of karma, of the struggles of existence.
And of the crosses, right on the point of vision.
That suggests something transformative, doesn't it? Linking perhaps compassion, sacrifice, given the cross symbol, and focused spiritual vision, maybe an entity linked to the Christ consciousness archetype or some form of profound spiritual transformation and understanding. It's like the visual definition of an entity who holds both sorrow and wisdom simultaneously while maintaining this incredibly clear, focused, yet compassionate vision.
It's a profound image. And for Joseph to receive that.
It definitely proves his inner senses were beginning to access some really deep archetypal levels of data. Significant progress for him. So when you boil it all down, the main psychological lesson we can really glean from this deep dive into session 46, especially focusing on Mark, is just the potent, undeniable power of subconscious memory to drive our current behavior.
Yeah, Mark's kindness, his generosity, even his vulnerability, all stemming from that intense overcompensation for past cruelty. It's so clear here.
But we also learned that critical, maybe slightly uncomfortable lesson that debt repayment is rarely neat and tidy, that interconnected family structure, while it provides the perfect crucible for resolving old issues,
It can get messy.
it often results in new problems, like the original debtor, the mother in this case, potentially incurring new debt through her manipulation, even as the old debt is being addressed. It shows the process of karma, or psychological balancing, is dynamic, it's messy, and it really requires conscious awareness and discipline to navigate successfully. You can't just coast.
It truly shows that the journey of self-discovery is never just a straight line, is it? And even the most complex, maybe even embarrassing personal dynamics from the past, like our pudgy weeping landowner and the angry sailor.
Chuckle's hard to forget that image.
Right. Even those can be revealed with enough perspective, and they can provide not just humor, but really deep insight into the underlying structure of our reality and our connections.
And that concept Seth brought up about creation paying debt through value extension, that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to maybe consider.
Okay, that's right.
Seth noted that knowledge and personality, they take up no physical space, right? And that creativity, a painting, a poem, is a kind of living psychological form that can transcend time.
Right.
So we ask you, what psychological form represents your greatest accomplishment in this life so far? It doesn't have to be a physical object. Maybe it's a relationship you've carefully built, or a field of knowledge you've mastered, or a skill you've honed. What is that living form you've created?
And the second part of that.
And what deep, perhaps unseen karmic debt or imbalance might that very creation be silently working to repay or rebalance in your own life tapestry?
Wow. That's a wonderful thought to mull over as you navigate your own deep dive into. Well, everything, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been fascinating, as always.
Don't forget to check out the Seth material and the books from New Awareness Network. And please do visit sethcenter.com for the early sessions to continue your own studies and exploration.
Keep digging deeper.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.